Greetings all, BW here again. This is the second video on Marrow that I'm doing. If you are interested, you can watch part one. It's also on my channel, but we're just going to go on from there. So about 4 months later, we have Uncanny X-Men issue number 346. And this is Scott Lobdell writing again, and it's a zero tolerance issue. There's a sort of a meta event going on called Zero Tolerance, which is Bastion is the bad guy and is basically wanting to round up mutants and eliminate them or keep them separated. Yeah, same old for a mutant story. But this issue opens with J. Jonah Jameson, and he's barking out orders to his team to cover the real story that he suspects is behind this operation, which itself is actually frequently described as or compared to like genocide, used sort of genocidal terms or reminiscent of World War II, Holocaust, that sort of thing. And not for no reason, right? This is language that we've seen already, even just in this series. So switches scenes. We see Spider-Man out, and Henry Gyrick. Is it Peter Gyrick? Henry Peter Gyrick? Anyway, he's kind of a longtime X-Men nemesis, and his car, as they're traveling, gets sort of knocked off the road. Like the road sort of bulges up, and out from underneath the road comes Marrow in her green costume and Callisto, and Cal says that they aren't there to kill anyone, only to make their voices heard. But then we find that her hopes for Marrow may have been misplaced in that regard, because Marrow is a little bit more spicy than Cal tends to be. We see a panel, though, which I thought was interesting. Cal thinks to herself, this isn't going well. Was I deluding myself to think that after Sarah's encounter with Cable and Storm, she'd be freed of her demons? Not super certain why she would be thinking that. I think the reference is to Cable number 42, which is the Lila Cheney concert that we covered in the last video. It's a little bit... It feels a little bit kind of off, but maybe it's just one of those filler things that we don't have to think about too much. Gyrick's bodyguards are Prime Sentinels, which are like Sentinel human hybrids. And they, straight off the bat, go on the attack, and they attack Spidey and Marrow, but Cal jumps in the way and gets injured. The pair of Sentinels decide to destroy all witnesses, including Gyrick even, and he observes that they were guarding Graydon Creed when he was assassinated. Again, this is kind of part of the event, but we're not really covering it. So Marrow asks Spider-Man why he would bother to cover their retreat, because he kind of tells them to go. And he responds to her, the real answer is that a long time ago, I learned that with great power, there must also come great responsibility. And Marrow just simply responds, a foolish motto to live by. Gyrick shoots the Sentinels in the back, just as they prepare a, quote, wide-band annihilation beam. Gotta love these comic terms. And it knocks them down, but he acknowledges that it won't keep them down for long. And he says, quote, the Sentinels were as much or more a threat to public safety as the mutant they nearly terminated, presumably referring to Callisto, which causes Marrow to lunge at him and respond, you don't know what a threat is, human. For years you've been afraid of us, hated us. So many of us decided to hide, to try to fit in. But those days, like your pathetic lives, are over. And there's a side plot going on with Jameson being confronted in his office by Bastion, who's trying to get him to print, among other things, the civilian identities of mutants. But Jameson's not buying it. And Jameson says, quote, I have every intention of learning everything there is to know about you, about your reasons for hunting mutants, and yeah, all about the X-Men themselves. But I have no reason to take the word of a murderer. The Daily Bugle's soul isn't for sale, Bastion. I'm not for sale. The printed word has tremendous power, and that power comes from the truth, not from someone's ability to twist that truth to manipulate it for his own end. Which is just a nice side plot, and it kind of echoes what's going on. Marrow threatened to kill Spider-Man. We're back on the action. Marrow threatened to kill Spider-Man if he didn't let her kill Gyrick, but Spidey responds, you know what, Marrow? If I thought killing me was going to stop you from hurting other people, I might even let you do it. And she asks, how do you know what I feel? To which Spidey says, what, you're the first person who's ever been hated for being different? I'll let you in on a secret, Marrow. Even before I became Spider-Man, there was a very short list of people who genuinely cared about me. People who loved me. And Marrow asks, so then why? Why help people who'd rather see you dead? Which is a really important question for Marrow to be asking, right? We're just sort of defining the character here. And Spider-Man responds, because once, a long time ago, I got so wrapped up in myself that I lost everything. I don't want to see that happen to you. And she says, "And if I have nothing to begin with?" But Spider-Man closes the conversation out by saying, "There's no such thing as nothing, Marrow." And then Gyrick pulls a gun on Marrow, but Spider-Man stands in the way, and he says she's learned something today. And if she does try to pull this kind of stunt again, I'll bring her in myself. Marrow brings Cal back down to the sewers. She says that she's going to go see Healer, who is a Morlock. We don't actually ever see Healer, but she's taking her down there to heal. And but she vows that she'll be back. Spidey says that he hopes that things will have improved by that time. And then the whole issue closes with Jameson being asked about what he had been, or what had been happening in his office, because he burned the disc that Bastion had given him, and so there was a little bit of a fire. And when asked what had been happening, Jameson responds, "Nothing." So cool. Great writing. We've got Lobdell writing again, and while I won't always go through every issue in detail, it's not usually necessary to go through every issue in detail, I think this one is important to look at for a couple reasons. First of all, it's a reboot of Marrow, and it's establishing her more in line with the X-Men vibe. She's considered a terrorist, but isn't really one, which contrasts with the Gene Nation stuff that we've seen, where she was just a terrorist. A lot of the dialogue here is really nice. The way it weaves together at the end is the kind of thing I just love to see. Remember, Spidey told Marrow that there's no such thing as nothing, which is exactly what Jameson told Robbie, which is like, yeah, it's not nothing going on. You know, there's a story going on here, but Jameson just says nothing. Another reason, second, this connects Spidey and Marrow, and we will see them again later. I like that he's kind of trying to mentor her, which is part of the reboot. She's young, brash, and needs guidance, and that he realizes that even though mutants are the targets now, it could eventually grow to threaten him as well. And there's a lot of language, again, reminiscent of the mutant massacre and the genocide and that sort of thing, which affects everyone, right? I'll go further and I'll point out that aside from a single page that shows Gambit doing something, this entire issue of X-Men features no actual X-Men. And I think, like, what a better way to drive home how this kind of evil thing, this event, always ends up affecting more than just one group of people. And this really is the crux of the event. As usual, some big bad government wants to destroy out of fear and hate, but heroic deeds are done, and the reader is sort of left to ponder the dichotomy of safety and freedom. So we have Jameson, Gyrick, and Senator Kelly, who isn't in this issue, but he is in the plot and he will show up later. These are all people who are frightened by what it means to have superpowered individuals running around and what it could spell for them personally and professionally. And then how do they navigate that situation dutifully, with loyalty, whatever that happens to mean, and with integrity, whatever that looks like for them in their spots. How are they going to choose? So I just thought it was really great. It's an X-Men title, but there's like a little hint of Gambit, and that's it, and doing an entirely different thing. But on that note, in the next issue, there's a lot more about Gambit, and that's Uncanny X-Men 347. It's mostly about that storyline. It opens with it, but eventually we see Marrow in the tunnels with Callisto. Marrow is holding her face as a chunk of bone is growing out of the left side of her face, and she's saying, "I will not scream, won't give in to the pain, won't fall to shame." And it's sort of staccato like that, like she's gritting her teeth and speaking kind of in those short bursts because she's in a lot of pain. Cal, who is laying down with bandages and presumably some kind of healing herbs on her injuries, just like a bunch of leaves, she says, quote, "The pain, Sarah, only gets worse if you're trying to deny it, the same way you're trying to deny who you are, the way you look. I know you're concentrating, attempting to prevent the constant shifting and regeneration of your bones that is part of your mutant ability, but you're going against the nature of things." And Marrow responds, "The natural order is what has always separated humans from mutants, Callisto. It's what forced the more hideous mutants into the city beneath the city. It's how we Morlocks found ourselves living on the refuse of surface dwellers. I will always fight against the natural order of things." Cal tries to help Marrow see beyond her rage and see hope, and she tells her to, quote, "Remember a time when you believed in something more than hurt." And so there's a single panel in sepia tones where we see a young Sarah. We see her back because she's looking forward, and what we're seeing excuse me, she has bony growths already showing like on her shoulders and on her head. She's looking at, and so we are seeing Angel, Warren, hanging and unconscious from back when Callisto first captured him, when she was going to like force him into marriage. And the young Sarah says, he's beautiful. Is he dead? But then we're kind of pulled back to the present as Marrow explains she has to go back and kill people to stop zero tolerance. And Cal begs her not to do that, not to kill anyone. And she says, quote, all the suffering you cause ultimately comes back to you. And then she says to, quote, find the X-Men, Sarah, help them this once. But Marrow says, quote, I will do whatever I can to make things better. But she does fall short of promising Cal not to take any lives. And so the last panel of this exchange is Callisto all alone in the tunnel, laying on a simple mat. And she says, quote, please, God, I know I gave up on you a long time ago, but please keep her safe from herself. Still got Lobdell writing. In fact, I'm going to mention it every time. I'm going to try to remember to mention every time who the writer is, but he's the writer for this whole event. This is the first time we actually learn something about Marrow's mutation beyond just having bone knives and apparently that second heart. So we learn that her bones grow constantly and painfully. All right. I'm going to go down. I promised rabbit trails. So here comes one of them. I might be reading too much into the text, but I'm not positive. I'm not convinced. So I'm going to mention it. The metaphor is made that Marrow rejects this natural order, which she extends to include the necessity of living as an outcast. She says that the Morlocks were forced to live in the tunnels, but we know that the truth is a little different, and that even when Storm offered them a place at Xavier's mansion, it was refused. And we now know that Marrow was there to hear Storm's offer. She was young, but she was there. When Cal tells her to remember when she believed in something, she recalls seeing a beautiful mutant, Angel. And Cal says that all the suffering Marrow causes will come back to her, which parallels Marrow's mutation. It's important to note that Marrow's naive solution to zero tolerance is to just kill more people, right? Cal convinces her to join the X-Men, and she agrees. So when we see her acting like a jerk to the other X-Men, we have to remember that she's not there really by her own choice. It's more of a favor to her mentor, friend, partner, mother. It's like a surrogate mother figure. So you have to think about all of this. Consider this in light of Marrow's response to her own power, which is to give in to the pain, which we can see as a metaphor for the natural order of mutant segregation, right? Or at least the Morlock segregation. For her, it brings shame. Marrow, in her youth and rebellious attitude, she talks a big game, but the natural order that she's resisting is that the Morlocks chose to live in the tunnels, and she's ashamed of that. She knows nobody forced them away, not any more than the X-Men who chose to stay and fight the prejudice. I dare say she's ashamed of what they did to Angel as well, but that's kind of a side point. Marrow consciously fights against her mutation, which presumably always causes some pain, even when she's not fighting, like even when she's not resisting it, but which hurts more when it's resisted. But the whole thing is subtly framed in a larger symbolic sense to mean that she fights against what she sees as the injustice of her and her people living as outcasts. In both cases, however, that resistance brings more pain. The better way is to accept the truth, which is that her mutation is painful and that the Morlocks chose to live below ground. But this is something Marrow doesn't want to do, or she isn't ready to do yet. So similar to Jameson's words in the last issue, connecting to the Spider-Marrow conversation in that issue, we see Cal's prayer here at the end as applying really to both of those circumstances, protecting Marrow from her own mutation, from her literal mutation, right? And from her desire for prideful vengeance. I just love that kind of writing when things wrap together like that. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. It's possible. I'm really, I dig the character, but I love to see those moments, and I just love to see them. But I will take the side note now. In the spirit of a character and a narrative that underwent frequent retcons, I will share a thought I had while I was typing up the script for this video. Last time I said that the Morlocks, I don't believe, were created by Dark Beast. And I still believe that. I still don't believe he created them. Not the way that, at least not the way that it's become accepted. But I went back to reread, and I found that there are some breadcrumbs there that, should one choose, could maybe be used to construct a narrative that Cal was the first in the tunnels, met Dark Beast, and then brought others to the tunnels, the quote, more hideous mutants. In Uncanny X-Men 170, it says that she christened the name Morlocks, and that she first found the alley. So despite having read these issues 100 times, I just wanted to point that out, and I can now maybe see some wiggle room for an explanation there, where Dark Beast was already there, Cal found him, he worked with her to bring down the future Morlocks, maybe directed her to use Caliban. I don't know. I still think it's weak, or at the very least kind of just like thin and not super supported. It's kind of one of those things that was told, not shown, but I can see room for it. And I wanted to bring that up because I thought it was relevant. It's okay to be wrong. It's okay to retcon. Apparently, I mean, that's kind of the theme of the character that we're doing this deep dive on, right? All right, moving on. The next issue is not Uncanny X-Men, but X-Men number 67. And it's another zero tolerance issue. And actually, really all we see of Marrow in this is that she sees Bobby Drake and Cecilia Reyes from a sewer grate as they're trying to sneak into Angel's apartment. And then later on, when they end up arrested, she cuts the power to the entire police building by stabbing the breaker with 2 bone knives. And she's waiting to ambush an approaching officer. This is like at the end of the issue. And she says, "Come, Jean Joke. 1 cop or 1,000, it makes no difference to me. You humans started this, and the mutant called Marrow is going to finish it." So she doesn't really feature prominently in the issue. So we'll just move right along to the next issue, which is, she's a little bit more prominent in this one. She becomes kind of the main character, or a main character-ish. This is X-Men 68. It's a zero tolerance issue that picks up immediately after that last issue with Marrow in the basement and 2 officers who are given names because they actually do show up later on. Aguinal, Aguinal, Agina. I'm not sure. Again, I'm terrible at pronouncing these names. But the second one is Cleveland. I'm pretty sure that I'm pronouncing that right. But those are the 2 officers sent to investigate the power outage. She knocks both of them out and she says, quote, "Sorry if that hurt, boys, but it's no worse than we Morlocks got in our day. Just be thankful I didn't kill you. Thought did cross my mind, but something stopped me. Gonna have to figure out what and exercise it." I will point out that in this episode, in this issue, for whatever reason, Lobdell is credited with the plot, but there's someone else, Siegel, doing the script. So Marrow does sound a little bit different. Like she talks with a little bit of like an accent or something like that. And I'm wondering if that's the difference. I don't know. I don't know how comic books work. So she says she doesn't know why she didn't kill these guys. There's a neat little bit sort of in the boxes expository. It says, "It turned out she had a second heart, the result of her unique physiology, and its beat has driven her up from the decayed metropolis she calls home." And that gets paralleled by the name of this. I should have said the name of this issue is Heart of the Matter. Okay, so there's that comment about her heart that gets paralleled with Charlotte Jones's heart, which is her son, but she calls him her heart. And then later we read, quote, "How could it get any worse? Deep in the heart of the land of the free, Senator Robert Kelly wonders the same thing, albeit for very different reasons." And he's kind of having this crisis of conscience. He's comparing zero tolerance to World War II plans and sort of the German plans and that genocide language and stuff that we've seen. Later, when he's talking to Bastion, he says, quote, "We're going to have to drive." Well, he's not talking to, I'm sorry if I said he was talking to, he's talking about Bastion. He's talking to Gyrick, I think. Quote, "We're going to have to drive whatever kind of stake we need to through his dark heart." And there are actually many more references to hearts in the issue, which again, with that cool writing stuff, I just think is neat little callbacks and themes and motifs. I just like to see that. So there's some inmates in the police station and they consider escaping in the ruckus that's going on. Cause like I said, there's other stuff going on. I'm not really focusing on it unless it's Marrow relevant. And Marrow tells them, she's just like got her bone knives and she's outside the bars. She tells them that they're going to be safer behind bars than out there with her. And they agree. They just kind of back off. Upstairs, Charlotte gets shot protecting Bobby and Cecilia, and then Marrow shows up as backup, and she says, quote, "Boo, flippin' hoo-hoo, scads of my people died. Callisto, who means the world to me, is barely clinging to life. I even met my maker." Presumably she's talking about Dark Beast there, right? "And who came to our rescue? Who was there to save the Morlocks? Heart of ice in all of you when it comes to a race you deem undesirable. But put a pretty surface child in danger, and the world stops spinning. A little bit on the nose with her narrative here, but fair point. Hearing about Charlotte's son, she says, who cares if the human lives? We need to protect our own kind. Not, but then Reyes like interrupts and says, I am not your kind by any definition. And that human has as much as right to live, and humans kind of like in quotes, has as much a right to live as any. Iceman kind of interrupts them, and they kind of banter back and forth. They end up leaving the station, but the streets are deserted, and Bobby realizes too late it is an ambush. And that's kind of how this issue ends. So I want to mention just a couple things here. I want to mention that almost all of the dialogue for Marrow so far has been in a wild-looking font. This changes even, I think, in the next issue, but it's been this like jagged-looking font, and then it does show up again later occasionally. And I just like it because it's very fitting to make her sound, you know, sort of in quotes, rude on top of everything else she says. Like it's a jagged font, which is, she is almost universally dripping with disdain for, quote, humans and full of insults and general rudeness. But then while there isn't much more worth discussing in this issue, Bobby does recognize her instantly with surprise, and she is a good counter to Reyes in the narrative in a lot of ways. And then also Marrow is always antagonizing and bickering, and Reyes doesn't take any of it. And then lastly, we get it confirmed that she had a second heart, though whether that means she presently has two hearts is not really clarified. Again, I kind of mentioned that a little bit last time. Lobdell, like I said, was responsible for the script, or responsible for the plot, but not the script. So I'm wondering if he just kind of had a general idea and then the scriptwriter takes and goes with it. I'm not sure how that works. All right, next issue. This is X-Men number 69, and here Lobdell is credited with words. So presumably that also means plot and script. I'm not sure. We pick up a little bit after the last issue, and then we continue on with that narrative. So we have Sabro, Marrow, and Cecilia, and they're traveling with Bobby on like one of his ice sleds. It's along the Connecticut coastline, and Sabra, who saved them from the ambush by Sentinels, is accompanying them. I put in my notes that she's accompanying him in the air because she can fly, but she's not always in the air. She's sometimes down with them. But while they're kind of having a chat, Marrow dives into the water and retrieves a prime sentinel. So apparently they were being like tracked. And she says, quote, that it would have, quote, done better to know I was once the greatest hunter in the dark domain where I was raised with my fellow Morlocks, end quote. Big talk. Later, as the impromptu team confronts Bastion, Marrow lunges at his mother figure. Again, she raised him, but it's I don't know if there's any biological connection. But she is stopped by Bobby, who tries to talk. And in fact, he like just kind of stops everybody. And then there's some dialogue here where Bobby says, this is an X-Men thing. It began with Cyclops and Wolverine, and the others ambushed by Zero Tolerance, as Bastion put all his faith behind the misguided notion that an entire nation would turn a blind eye to mutants being hunted down and killed or imprisoned. But there's one thing you didn't count on, Bastion. Any nation is made up of people, of individuals. Some of those individuals are mutants. That's the part of this you and every other hate monger never got. Me, Cyclops, Beast, Dr. Reyes, Storm, none of us are X-Men because we want to be. We are X-Men because someone has to stand up to people like you and Magneto and Apocalypse and anyone else who thinks terrorizing or terminating mutants or humans or anybody is the right thing to do. So he goes on to give a speech about how Bastion's attempts at making a better world for humanity are dubiously ironic in light of how many casualties it has actually cost. And then S.H.I.E.L.D. finally arrives to kind of clean up the scene. Marrow asks Bobby, why don't you want me to kill him now? And he responds to conclude the issue in the final panel, because in the end, that may be all that separates people like him from people like us. So this is the last issue of the event. It turns out that Bobby really can sort of lead his own team, which was kind of part of his story here. The whole thing is a bit preachy and dramatic, but I think that's where X-Men stories can shine. So I don't mind it. Marrow is shown to be a formidable hunter and I guess maybe an underwater combatant. I'm not really sure. It's so funny because they're fighting against these prime sentinels in the previous issues, and then they're like really formidable opponents, right? And then they're just like going along, and she just dives down in the water and pops up, and she's got one with her. And it was like, oh, would it have been easier to fight them underwater with knives or something? I don't know. It's just like a really easy thing she does. Almost like it's there just to like have her be able to boast about who she is. Anyway, I thought it was interesting that Bobby, when he's listing the X-Men, doesn't include Marrow in that list of X-Men, but he does include Reyes. And then after Reyes, he says Storm. And that's kind of where you would expect Marrow's name to have been. Like, he's listing himself, other X-Men, and then like these people in this issue. And so you'd expect that the last one would be Marrow, but it's not. It's Storm, which I think is kind of interesting considering Storm and Marrow's connection. I can't say that Marrow's role in this entire story is very central, but it's kind of one of those stories where the main character is really the plot. And then also some other things are happening, like showing off new characters or powers or whatever. She still gets a lot of panel count, though, which isn't always the case moving forward. Something that I alluded to earlier, and which I believe is worth revisiting, and we will talk about it more at length when I wrap up all of these videos someday. But I want to mention it now, kind of plant the seed. Heroism isn't something you are, it's something you do. And Bobby is driving this point home as he womps on Bastion, and Marrow is there paying attention the whole time. She succeeds in her mission of helping the X-Men to shut down Zero Tolerance, and she didn't have to kill anyone, except maybe the underwater Prime Sentinel, but do you really kill Prime Sentinels? I don't know. This entire event really just reintroduces Marrow to the reader and serves as her proper X-Men debut, sort of, complete with her classic green outfit, which will become her standard look from here on out. Even though it does change off and on throughout the next many years, it seems like if you look up Marrow or you ask someone about Marrow, that's the costume they typically remember is green. And it does change a little bit, but mostly it's that green, the green top and bottom that is kind of like iconic for her character. Even though the books themselves will continue without a break, this event is at an end. So we'll just, if we're thinking of eras, we'll just call this the Zero Tolerance era Marrow. And Lobdell himself doesn't actually return to writing for Marrow for quite some time. And so starting with the next video, it's going to be different writers. Some of them are names we've heard or seen before, even though I haven't mentioned them. They've been associated with Marrow, but we're kind of going in a different direction as far as the writers are concerned. And so I think it's appropriate to kind of cut off the era. I struggled with putting Zero Tolerance in with the next group of issues, but it really is kind of its own thing, especially considering that it's Scott Lobdell from A to Z, and then he stops now. It was like, all right, well, it can be its own video. Okay, that's all I have to say here. Thanks so much for watching. If you have any questions, comments, observations, thoughts, if you have any corrections, if there's anything I mispronounced or missed when I was reading, be sure to let me know in the comments. And I hope you are enjoying this as much as I am. It's a pretty quick turnaround for this video. The next video is going to be, I think, longer, and so I'm not certain when to expect that one out. Maybe more than just a few days. But either way, again, thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Excelsior.